The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange as Carter settled onto his usual bench in the park. The soft whispers of the wind rustled the leaves, blending with the distant laughter of children playing on the swings. For most, it was an ordinary evening, but not for Carter. He wasn't here to relax or enjoy the view. He was here for her. It had been 5 days since he first saw the girl, small, fragile, her presence a quiet cry for help in a noisy world. She couldn't have been older than 12, her dark, curly hair framing a face that seemed far too serious for someone her age. But it wasn't her silence that caught Carter's attention. It was her hands. They moved with urgency, shaping signs he couldn't fully understand. Yet their desperation was clear. And now, after days of waiting and searching, his heart leaped when he finally saw her again. She appeared at the edge of the park, her movements hesitant, her eyes darting nervously as if searching for someone or avoiding them. Clutching a stuffed bear to her chest, she was a picture of innocence wrapped in fear. Carter kept his movements slow and deliberate, careful not to scare her away. He waited until she approached the bench and sat, her shoulders tense and her gaze distant. "Hey there," Carter said softly, crouching to her level. He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he spoke anyway, hoping the tone of his voice conveyed kindness. Then, remembering her earlier signs, he raised his hands awkwardly, attempting to mimic the gestures he'd seen her use. He didn't know much about sign language, but he hoped the effort would show her he was someone she could trust. The girl's eyes widened in recognition, and for a moment, Carter thought she might bolt. But then her expression softened, and she nodded ever so slightly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and a pencil stub. Her hands trembled as she wrote, her movements hurried and shaky. When she handed him the note, Carter felt his stomach tighten as he read the words. Asterisk, asterisk, help me. Bad man. Guns. Basement. Asterisk, asterisk. Carter's grip tightened on the paper. The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He glanced back at her, her wide, tear-filled eyes pleading for him to believe her. A wave of anger and protectiveness surged within him. He couldn't walk away from this, not when it was so clear she needed someone to step in. He nodded firmly and took out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Flipping it open, he scribbled a response. Asterisk, asterisk, will help you. I promise. But I need to know more to make sure you're safe. Do you trust me? Asterisk, asterisk. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the edge of the park before settling back on him. Slowly she nodded, taking the notebook and drawing a rough layout of a house. She marked an X on the basement and handed it back to Carter. Before he could say anything more, her head snapped up and her face twisted in fear. Carter followed her gaze and saw a man, tall, broad, with a menacing scowl, stalking toward them. The man's fists were clenched, his eyes locked on the girl with a rage that made Carter's blood run cold. Zora. The man barked, his voice low but furious. The girl, Zora, shrank into herself, clutching her bear tighter as the man reached them. Carter stepped between them instinctively, his years as a veteran kicking in. He knew danger when he saw it, and this man radiated it. She's fine, Carter said, keeping his voice steady but firm. You don't need to be rough with her. The man sneered, his lip curling as he glared at Carter. Stay out of this, he growled. She's my kid, and I'll deal with her how I see fit. Carter's jaw tightened. Every instinct told him to fight back, to protect Zora from whatever this man planned to do. But he knew better than to escalate the situation. For now, he had to stay calm. The man grabbed Zora's arm roughly, making her wince, and yanked her away. She glanced back at Carter, her tearful eyes filled with desperation as she was dragged toward a car. Carter's fists clenched at his sides as he watched them disappear into distance. He had promised her he'd help, and he wasn't about to break that promise. Pulling out his phone, his hands shaking with anger and urgency, Carter dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Marcus, he said, his voice tight. I need your help. It's about a girl. The voice on the other end paused, then replied calmly, "Tell me everything." The phone call lingered in Carter's mind long after Marcus had promised to meet him. He paced his small apartment, his thoughts racing as he tried to piece everything together. The girl's fear was palpable, and the weight of her words echoed in his head. Asterisk, asterisk, bad man. Guns. Basement. Asterisk, asterisk. What kind of life was she living? And why hadn't anyone else noticed? The question swirled in his mind, tightening his resolve. Carter hadn't always been the guy people turned to for help. After leaving the military, he'd spent years trying to outrun his own demons. The scars of war, both physical and emotional, had turned him into a man who kept his head down, avoiding trouble wherever possible. But something about Zora's silent plea had broken through his walls. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he couldn't walk away, not this time. When Marcus finally arrived the next morning, Carter was already waiting outside the diner, clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Marcus stepped out of his car, his expression serious as he approached. He was a few years younger than Carter, with a sharp mind and a knack for digging into things most people preferred to leave buried. "All right, Carter," Marcus said, sliding into the booth across from him. "What's going on? You sounded pretty shaken last night." Carter leaned forward, lowering his voice as he explained everything. Zora, her note, the rough sketch of the house, and the man who had taken her away. Marcus listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. When Carter finished, Marcus let out a low whistle. "This guy sounds like trouble," Marcus said. "If he's got guns in the house and he's treating her like that, we're looking at a dangerous situation." "I know," Carter replied, his voice steady but tight. "That's why I called you. You've got connections, Marcus. You know how to get information. I need to know everything about this guy. Who he is, what he's done, anything we can use to help her." Marcus nodded, pulling out his laptop and opening it on the table. "All right, let's start with what we know. You said his name is Eric." "Yeah," Carter said. "Eric Hanley. That's what she wrote in her note." Marcus typed furiously, his eyes scanning the screen as he pulled up records and databases Carter didn't even know existed. Minutes turned into an hour as they sifted through the details. By the time Marcus finally leaned back in his seat, his face was grim. "This guy's got a record," Marcus said. "Assault charges, a few arrests for possession of illegal firearms, and some connections to local gangs. Nothing recent, but enough to paint a picture. He's bad news." Carter clenched his fists, his mind flashing back to the way Zora had flinched when Eric grabbed her arm. The image sent a fresh wave of anger through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help Zora. Not now. "What do we do?" Carter asked, his voice low. "How do we get her out of there?" "We need proof," Marcus said, his tone firm. "If we go to the police with just a story, they won't do much. We need evidence, something solid, like those guns in the basement, and we need to document the abuse. Bruises, marks, anything that shows she's in immediate danger." Carter's jaw tightened. The thought of waiting, of leaving Zora in that house for even one more day, made his stomach churn. But he knew Marcus was right. Acting too soon could backfire, leaving Zora even more vulnerable than before. "I'll keep an eye on her," Carter said after a moment. "She comes to the park sometimes when she can. Maybe I can talk to her again, get more information." Marcus nodded. "Good. I'll dig deeper into Hanley, see if I can find anything else. In the meantime, we've got to be careful. If this guy's as dangerous as he seems, he won't take kindly to anyone sticking their nose in his business." Carter agreed, though the words felt heavy in his throat. Careful wasn't his strong suit, but this wasn't about him. It was about Zora, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. Over the next few days, Carter kept his routine. He went to the park every afternoon, sitting on the same bench and watching for any sign of Zora. The waiting was agonizing, each passing day without seeing her stretching his patience to its limit. Every time a car pulled up or a shadow moved at the edge of the park, his heart jumped, hoping it was her. but the park remained quiet, and the emptiness gnawed at him. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the park began to empty, Carter spotted a figure in the distance. His breath caught as he recognized Zora, her small frame silhouetted against the fading light. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the park as if searching for him, or watching for someone else. Carter stood, his movements slow and deliberate as he approached her. Her shoulders relaxed slightly when she saw him, and she hurried over, clutching her bear tightly. Carter knelt to her level, offering her the notebook and pen. She took them with trembling hands, her eyes darting nervously toward the street. Asterisk, asterisk, it knows I talked to you, asterisk, asterisk, she wrote. Asterisk, asterisk, is angry. I don't know what to do. Asterisk, asterisk. Carter's heart sank. He scribbled a quick response. Asterisk, asterisk, stay strong. We're going to help you. Just hold on a little longer. Can you tell me anything else about the basement? Asterisk, asterisk. Zora hesitated, then nodded, drawing a crude sketch on the page. She marked the location of a door and added more details, stairs, a padlock, and boxes. Carter studied the drawing, his mind racing. They were close. They just needed one more piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, Zora stiffened, her eyes wide with fear. Carter turned, his stomach dropping as he saw Eric standing at the edge of the park. His face was a mask of anger, and his fists were clenched as he stormed toward them. Zora. Eric barked, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. What the hell are you doing? Carter stood, positioning himself between Eric and Zora. His military instincts kicked in, his body tense, but his expression calm. She's just sitting here, Carter said evenly. No harm in that. Eric's eyes narrowed, his lip curling in disdain. You don't know what you're messing with, old man, he growled. Stay out of it. Carter held his ground, refusing to be intimidated. But before he could respond, Eric grabbed Zora's arm, yanking her away. She winced, her eyes meeting Carter's for one heartbreaking moment before she was dragged toward the car. As the door slammed shut and the car sped away, Carter stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a stone. He had promised to help her, but she was still trapped. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Marcus with shaking hands. It's getting worse, Carter said, his voice tight. We need to move. Now. There was a pause on the other end before Marcus replied, his tone steady but urgent. All right. Let's make it happen. I've got some leads. Beat me tomorrow. As Carter hung up, the park grew darker around him. The silence felt suffocating, a reminder of the clock ticking against them. He stared at the spot where Zora had stood, his resolve hardening. He had made her a promise, and he intended to keep it, no matter what it took. Carter barely slept that night, his mind replaying the scene at the park over and over again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Zora's terrified face as Eric dragged her away. The weight of his helplessness gnawed at him, but it only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't going to let this go. He had to believe that they could get her out, that they could give her a chance at something better. When he met Marcus the next morning, the younger man had a stack of papers and a laptop open on the diner table. His expression was serious, the kind of look Carter had only seen a few times before, when things were about to get dangerous. I've got more on Hanley, Marcus said as Carter slid into the booth. He's deeper in trouble than I thought. He's been linked to some arms deals in the past, nothing proven, but there's enough chatter to suggest he's still at it. That basement Zora mentioned. I'd bet my savings it's not just guns down there. If he's running something illegal, that could be our way in. Carter leaned in, his voice low. So we get proof, take it to the cops, and they raid the place. Marcus shook his head. It's not that simple. Guys like Hanley know how to cover their tracks. Marcus hesitated before speaking. Even if we found something, we need eyes we'd need to make sure it's solid enough. Zora's the only one who knows what's going on. Otherwise, he'll walk scared, and Zora will pay with good reason. Carter frowned. If we could find a way to get her a phone or a camera, she could document what's happening. So what do we do? But that's a big risk. Carter thought about Zora's trembling hands, the fear in her eyes. She was already carrying so much. Asking her to do more felt wrong. But without her help, they had nothing. "Let me try talking to her again," Carter said finally. "I'll figure out a way to get her what she needs. But we have to be ready to move as soon as we have something." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Be careful, Carter. This guy's not going to take kindly to you poking around. He's already suspicious." Carter knew Marcus was right, but he didn't have the luxury of caution. Zora was counting on him, and he wasn't about to let her down. The next few days were a blur of planning and waiting. Carter returned to the park each afternoon, hoping for a chance to see Zora again. He kept a discreet distance from other visitors, not wanting to draw attention, but his heart sank each time the sun set without any sign of her. The tension was unbearable, the feeling of time slipping away like sand through his fingers. Then, one late afternoon, she appeared. Carter spotted her from across the park, her small frame moving quickly and nervously toward their usual spot. She looked thinner, her movements more hurried, as if she were constantly looking over her shoulder. When she reached him, she didn't sit down. Instead, she handed him a folded piece of paper and darted back the way she came without a word. Carter waited until she was out of sight before opening the note. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Asterisk, asterisk. "Is leaving tonight. I can't stay much longer. Please hurry." Asterisk, asterisk. His chest tightened as he read the words. If Hanley was leaving, it could be their only chance to act without him there. But it also meant Zora was running out of time. She couldn't endure this much longer, and Carter wouldn't ask her to. He called Marcus immediately, relaying the message. Marcus's voice was calm but urgent as he replied, "If he's leaving, we might be able to get inside. But we need to know for sure he's gone. Can you watch the house?" "I'll do whatever it takes," Carter said without hesitation. That evening, Carter parked a few streets away from Hanley's house, his eyes trained on the dimly lit windows. It was a small, unassuming house, the kind of place you'd pass without a second thought. But inside, he knew, was a world of fear and secrets. He waited in the darkness, his heart pounding every time the front door opened or a shadow moved behind the curtains. Finally, just after 9 o'clock, Hanley stepped outside. He was carrying a duffel bag, his movements hurried as he threw it into the back of a black SUV. Carter watched as the vehicle pulled away, disappearing into the night. He waited another 15 minutes, just to be sure, before calling Marcus. "He's gone," Carter said. "It's now or never." Marcus arrived shortly after, bringing a small backpack filled with tools. He'd come prepared, and his calm efficiency helped steady Carter's nerves. Together, they approached the house, keeping to the shadows as they moved. The lock on the back door was old and rusted, and Marcus had it open within minutes. The house was eerily quiet as they stepped inside, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. Carter's stomach churned as they moved through the rooms, each one more oppressive than the last. The basement door loomed ahead, just as Zora had described it. A padlock secured the handle, but Marcus made quick work of it. As they descended the stairs, the smell of damp concrete and metal filled the air. The basement was dimly lit, with rows of crates and shelves lining the walls. Carter's heart raced as he spotted the weapons, rifles, handguns, even a few explosives. But what caught his attention most was the small, makeshift sleeping area in the corner. A blanket and pillow were arranged neatly, and beside them was a notebook filled with Zora's careful handwriting. "She's been living down here," Carter said, his voice tight. "Like a prisoner." Marcus took photos of everything, his camera clicking softly in the stillness. "This is enough to bring him down," he said. "We just need to get out of here before he comes back." But as they turned to leave, a noise from upstairs froze them in place. The sound of a door creaking open, followed by heavy footsteps, sent a jolt of fear through Carter's chest. Carter exchanged a tense glance with Marcus, but someone was mind racing. They had to get out, and fast, but the basement door was their only exit. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs with deliberate, measured steps. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry, and they weren't alone. Carter's breath caught as the footsteps neared. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything else. Marcus signaled for him to stay quiet, gesturing toward the corner where a narrow column of shadows offered the smallest chance of concealment. They both moved silently, pressing themselves against the cold, damp wall, their bodies rigid with tension. The creak of the basement door opening sent a shiver down Carter's spine. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the rows of crates and shelves. Carter held his breath, the faint scent of mildew and oil filling his nose as the footsteps descended, slow and deliberate. The beam of light passed over their hiding spot, lingering for an agonizing second before continuing its sweep of the room. "Didn't expect company tonight," a voice drawled, cold and menacing. It was Eric. Carter recognized the tone instantly, the same voice that had threatened Zora at the park. "But I'm not surprised. People like to stick their noses where they don't belong." Carter's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. Every instinct told him to charge, to take Eric down before he could cause any more harm. But Marcus grabbed his arm in a firm, silent warning. Patience. Timing. They couldn't afford to act on impulse. Eric moved deeper into the basement, his flashlight now pointed at the makeshift sleeping area. He kicked the blanket aside, muttering under his breath. "Stupid girl. Always making trouble." Carter's chest tightened at the venom in Eric's words. The thought of Zora enduring this cruelty day after day filled him with a surge of anger so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. But he forced himself to stay still, to stay silent, even as Eric began rummaging through the crates, his movements jerky and agitated. "You think you can just disappear, huh?" Eric muttered, almost to himself. "You think I won't find you?" Marcus nudged Carter gently, pointing toward the stairs. Eric's back was turned, and for a moment the way was clear. It was now or never. Carter nodded, his heart pounding, and they began to move, inching toward the exit with painstaking care. Just as they reached the first step, the flashlight beam swung back around. "Who's there?" Eric barked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Carter froze, his mind racing. The element of surprise was gone, and Eric was between them and the only exit. There was no choice now but to confront him. Carter stepped out of the shadows, his hands raised to show he wasn't armed. "Just me," Carter said evenly, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. "I was looking for Zora." Eric's expression twisted into a sneer. "You're that old man from the park. Thought I told you to stay out of this." He reached for something at his side, a knife glinting in the dim light. Carter's muscles tensed, but he stood his ground. "Zora deserves better than this. She's just a kid." Eric laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You don't know a damn thing about her. She belongs here. She knows what happens to people who cross me." Behind Eric, Marcus moved silently, creeping closer to the crates. Carter saw the younger man grab a metal rod, holding it at his side as he edged toward Eric. Carter kept talking, trying to buy time. "She doesn't belong in a basement, scared for her life," Carter said. "You've taken everything from her, but you don't own her." Eric's eyes narrowed, his grip on the knife tightening. "You've got a death wish, old man." Before Eric could take another step, Marcus struck. The metal rod came down hard on Eric's arm, the knife clattering to the floor. Eric shouted in pain, spinning around to face Marcus. Carter didn't waste a second. He lunged forward, grabbing Eric's other arm and pinning it behind his back. Eric thrashed, but the two of them overpowered him, forcing him to the ground. "Call the cops," Marcus said, his voice strained as he helped hold Eric down. Carter nodded, fumbling for his phone with one hand while keeping Eric restrained with the other. His fingers shook as he dialed, the sound of the dispatcher's voice on the other and a faint reassurance. He quickly relayed the situation, his words hurried but clear. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Eric continued to struggle, cursing and threatening them both, but Carter and Marcus didn't let up. When the sound of sirens finally echoed in the distance, A wave of relief washed over Carter. It wasn't over, but help was on the way. The basement door burst open, and uniformed officers flooded in, their weapons drawn. Carter and Marcus stepped back as the police took over, cuffing Eric and reading him his rights. One of the officers turned to them, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "We've got him," the officer said. "But what the hell's going on here?" Carter took a deep breath, his body still trembling from the adrenaline. "There's a girl, Zora. She's the one you need to protect. She's been living in hell, and she needs out." The officer nodded, his demeanor softening. "We'll find her, and we'll make sure she's safe." As Eric was led away, still shouting obscenities, Carter felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but the tension remained. Zora was still out there, and they wouldn't rest until she was free. The battle wasn't over yet. The relief Carter felt as the officers led Eric away was fleeting. He stood there in the dimly lit basement, his chest heaving from the effort, while Marcus leaned against a wall, rubbing his arm where Eric had elbowed him during the struggle. The faint hum of police radios and the crunch of boots on the old wooden stairs filled the silence, but something gnawed at Carter's mind, an unsettling feeling he couldn't shake. "Zora," Carter said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned to Marcus, his expression grim. "They're taking Eric, but where is she? What if she's not safe?" Marcus straightened, concern flashing in his eyes. "The police will find her, Carter. We've done what we can." But Carter shook his head, interrupting him. "No, Eric wouldn't go down quietly. He knows the system. He's planned for something like this. What if he's already done something? We can't just wait." Before Marcus could respond, one of the officers approached them, holding a small black phone in his gloved hand. "We found this on Eric," the officer said, his tone cautious. "It's locked, but there's a message on the lock screen. Might want to take a look." Carter and Marcus exchanged a glance before leaning in to read the glowing screen. The message was short but chilling. "Asterisk, if anything happens, you know what to do. Don't let her talk. Asterisk." The words sent a cold wave of fear crashing over Carter. His mind raced, piecing together the implications. "He's got someone else," Carter said, his voice hoarse. "Someone working with him." Marcus swore under his breath. "We need to find her now. She's in more danger than we thought." The officer frowned but nodded. "We've got units searching the area, but if there's someone else involved, we'll need more information. Did he mention anything before we got here?" Carter shook his head, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "No, but there has to be something. A name, a place, anything." Another officer called down from the top of the stairs. "Hey, we've got a lead. There's an address in his file. A storage unit on the outskirts of town. It's listed under an alias, but it's him." Carter's heart skipped a beat. That's got to be it. He's hiding something there. The officer hesitated. It could be dangerous. If he has an accomplice, we don't know what we're walking into. Carter met the officer's gaze, determination hardening his features. "Dangerous or not, we can't leave her out there. I'll go with you." Marcus stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We'll both go. She needs us." The officer looked between them, clearly weighing the risks, but finally nodded. "Fine, but you follow our lead, understood." The drive to the storage unit felt agonizingly slow. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the police cruiser's engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Carter stared out the window, his mind replaying every moment he spent with Zora. Her small hands trembling as she signed for help, the fear in her eyes when Eric dragged her away. Each memory only strengthened his resolve. When they arrived, the scene was ominous. The storage facility was dimly lit, the rows of identical metal doors stretching into the darkness. A chain-link fence surrounded the area, the padlock on the gate hastily broken. The officers moved in first, their flashlights cutting through the gloom as they checked the perimeter. Carter and Marcus stayed close behind, their nerves taut. Every creak of a door, Every rustle of the wind seemed amplified in the tense silence. Finally, they reached the unit listed in Eric's file. The officer at the front signaled for everyone to stop, motioning for another to pick the lock. The door rolled up with a metallic screech, revealing a dimly lit interior cluttered with boxes, tarps, and random tools. But what drew everyone's attention was the small figure huddled in the corner, bound and gagged. Zora. Carter rushed forward before anyone could stop him, dropping to his knees beside her. "Zora," he said softly, his hands trembling as he untied the ropes around her wrists. Her wide eyes filled with tears as she recognized him, and she clung to him tightly once she was free. "It's okay," Carter whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." But the relief was short-lived. One of the officers, still searching the unit, called out sharply, "We've got movement outside. Someone's here." Carter pulled Zora closer, shielding her with his body as the officers moved to intercept whoever was approaching. Marcus positioned himself defensively near the door, holding a flashlight like a weapon. The tension in the air was electric, every second driving out painfully as they waited for the intruder to reveal themselves. Then a voice cut through the silence, low and mocking. "You should have stayed out of this." It wasn't Eric. Carter recognized the voice from one of Zora's earlier attempts to describe her fear. This was the accomplice. And judging by the sound of footsteps closing in, they weren't alone. Carter's heart pounded as he whispered to Marcus, "We need to get her out of here now." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. But how? We're surrounded. The officers called for backup over their radios, their voices steady but urgent. But Carter knew they were running out of time. Whoever was outside wasn't here to negotiate. The accomplice's words, laced with menace, echoed in his mind. Don't let her talk. As the first gunshot shattered the tense silence, Carter realized the stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just about saving Zora anymore. It was about surviving long enough to ensure she'd never have to live in fear again. The gunshot echoed through the storage unit, reverberating off the metal walls like a thunderclap. Carter instinctively pulled Zora closer, shielding her as Marcus dove for cover behind a stack of boxes. The officers immediately returned fire, their shouts blending with the chaos. The accomplice, hidden in the shadows, wasn't alone. Another figure had joined them, and their coordinated attack was relentless. Carter's mind raced. They couldn't wait for backup. The situation was spiraling out of control too quickly. Zora clung to him, her small hands trembling as she tried to sign something. It was difficult to make out in the dim light, but Carter focused on her movements, his heart sinking as he realized what she was trying to say. Trap asterisk. "Marcus," Carter shouted over the commotion. "They've set a trap. We need to move now." Marcus nodded, his face pale but determined. He motioned to one of the officers, who signaled the others to shift their focus. A burst of gunfire from the attackers created a brief opening, and Carter took the chance to lift Zora into his arms. He darted toward the back of the unit, praying there was another exit. Behind them, Marcus and the officers held their ground, their return fire keeping the attackers at bay. Carter reached the rear wall, his hands frantically searching for a latch or opening. Zora tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward a small vent near the floor. It was tight, but it might be their only way out. "Stay close," Carter whispered, helping her through the vent before crawling in after her. The space was cramped, the air thick with dust, but Zora moved quickly, leading him toward a faint glimmer of light at the other end. As they emerged into the open air, the cold night hit them like a slap. Carter glanced around, his breath visible in the frosty air. They were behind the storage facility, a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and overgrown weeds. For a moment, it seemed they were safe. But the moment shattered. "Thought you could slip away," stepped into the alley. The man sneered, blocking their his path. Voice dripping with malice. It was the accomplice. "You've caused enough trouble." Wiry man with cold eyes, hand her over, and a smirk. Carter placed Zora behind him, spine, his body tense. He held a gun. "You don't have to do this," he said, in the moonlight, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "It's over. Eric's been caught. Let her go, and you can still walk away." The man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Walk away? You don't get it, did you? She knows too much. I can't let her talk. Carter's mind raced, searching for a way to buy time. He stepped forward slightly, drawing the man's attention. You're scared of a little girl? That's pathetic. She's already beaten you. She's alive, and she's not afraid of you anymore. The man's smirk faltered, anger flickering in his eyes. He raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a sharp whistle pierced the air. The man turned, confused, as Marcus appeared at the mouth of the alley, holding a makeshift weapon, a metal pipe he grabbed during the chaos. Drop it, Marcus growled, his voice low and commanding. The accomplice hesitated, his confidence wavering. It was all the distraction Carter needed. In one swift motion, he lunged forward, knocking the gun from the man's hand. The weapon clattered to the ground as the two men grappled, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Zora watched, her wide eyes filled with terror. But then, as if gathering every ounce of courage she had, she reached down and grabbed the gun. Her hands shook as she held it, aiming it at the man who had tormented her. Stop, she shouted, her voice breaking, but loud enough to freeze everyone in place. The accomplice turned, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Carter, breathing heavily, stepped back, his hands raised. It's okay, Zora, he said gently. You're in control now. Zora's grip on the gun tightened, but instead of firing, she threw it to the ground. The clang echoed in the silent alley. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the man, her voice trembling but defiant. You don't control me anymore. At that moment, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, red and blue lights illuminating the alley. The accomplice, realizing he was out of options, tried to run, but Marcus tackled him, pinning him to the ground until the officers arrived. As the police took the man into custody, Carter knelt beside Zora, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. You're safe now, he said softly. It's over. Zora looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She signed something slowly, her movements deliberate. Asterisk, thank you, asterisk. Carter smiled, tears brimming in his own eyes. You're the brave one, Zora. You saved yourself. As the night wore on and the chaos finally subsided, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just the end of one harrowing night. It was the beginning of something new for Zora, a chance to reclaim her voice, her power, and her life. And as he watched her walk away with the officers, her head held high, he knew she would never be silenced again.